Well, take your Bibles and open up with me to the book of Daniel, or grab your phones or whatever you're using there and turn to Daniel. Chapter 2 is where we'll be this morning, and we are talking about the word impossibility this morning. So let me just kind of unpack that word for you. You may remember last week we ended the lesson with this statement: your faith should overcome your fears and attempt things that are impossible without God. In other words, faith is the thing that says, okay, this is something that is impossible for me to accomplish without God. Now, chapter 2 is all about something that is absolutely impossible. And even though it's absolutely impossible, God works even doing the impossible. In fact, maybe the best way to say that is only God can do the impossible. You and I can do some things that feel or seem impossible to us. But when it comes to something that is genuinely not possible, only God can do the impossible. Let me define that word for you real quickly before we jump into the text. Impossible, not able to occur, beyond the bounds of possibility, out of the question, not worth considering, unfeasible, non-viable, unimaginable, inconceivable, unattainable, unachievable, hopeless, implausible, okay? Hopefully that's defined enough for you, all right? The point is this, that when we say the word impossible, we are saying this is not possible. Now, Jesus reminds us when we get to the New Testament that all things are possible with God. So there are no impossibilities. But when we think of the word impossible, our world and culture says, but you can do it, okay? No, some things are just impossible. And in Daniel chapter 2, there is a request made that is absolutely impossible. So let's just pick up the reading. I'm going to read about a dozen verses here in Daniel chapter 2, starting at verse 1. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, that's this pagan king in Babylon, right? Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. And then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. Now, just for a moment, understand that's impossible. Imagine tomorrow morning that your wife, your husband, whoever's there with you, wakes up and they said, I had a dream last night. And you say, what was it about? And they said, I don't know, you tell me. Okay. It doesn't work that way, right? You need to know the dream to interpret the dream. It's impossible. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid to ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. And they answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. And the king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time because you see that the word for me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. And the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. Because of this, the king was very angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. And then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree of the king so urgent? And then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in, verse 16, and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Okay. Let me give you 3 lessons you're going to learn about something that's impossible. All right, here it is. Impossible tasks expose our inabilities. They expose our inabilities. Impossible tasks expose our inabilities. By the way, you should be using that little teacher guide, right? So grab that, write some thoughts down. If I'm going too fast, shoot your hand up and I'll ignore you and I'll keep talking, okay? But write them down, all right? That's the idea here. Write these thoughts down. Impossible task. I'm just kidding. If you shoot your hand up, I'll slow down, I promise, okay? Impossible task expose our inabilities. Here's the second idea. Impossible tasks are meant to drive us to God. And finally, impossible tasks are only accomplished by God. Now, there are things that have happened in your life where you probably looked at them and said they're impossible. You ready for this? So I won't even try. Okay. I want to encourage you that you understood the first part. It exposed your inabilities. You may not have understood part 2 and 3, that impossible tasks are meant to drive you to God, and you probably didn't grab number 3, that those tasks are only accomplished by God. So let's just take the first one, okay? Impossible tasks expose our inabilities. Here's 3 ways. Our inabilities surface fear. Our inabilities reveal a prideful spirit. Our inabilities bring about frustration. Note the first one. Here it is. Our inabilities surface fear. We're afraid of circumstances we can't control. So when something is impossible, we don't take it on because we're afraid. We're afraid of something we can't control. I've been told this, that the leading fear, the greatest fear that everybody faces, obviously, is the fear of death. Almost everybody is afraid of dying, and that's the top fear. You know what's second to that? The fear of public speaking. That's right. That's why when you go to a funeral sometimes, you're encountering both fears. People are facing the fear that they're too one day going to die, and then the pastor says something like, does anybody have something they want to share about this person? And everybody there is a guest and a friend, and they're saying, I got something I want to share, but I'm not sharing it, okay? Because the only thing that scares me more than dying is actually talking in front of people. Why? Why? Because you're afraid that you will not be able to do it in such a way that you'll reveal that you can't control it, right? Our inabilities surface fear, and we're afraid. Look at this in 2 words here. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled. And he actually confesses this fear in verse 3 when he says, my spirit is troubled. Now, the word there for troubled is actually the word that means to stir something up. But note this. It's in an imperfect verb form, which means it didn't go away. If it had been in a perfect verb form, it would have been, it was troubled, and I'm all better. But imperfect means it has ongoing consequences. He's troubled in the morning, he's troubled in the afternoon, he remains troubled. Okay. You probably have had an experience like that in your life, where something really difficult happened and your mind was always on it. It was going back to it. You were thinking about it. You couldn't get away from it. Right? I have a memory, a 16-year-old memory of my dad losing his job. And I never really shared this story with him until he was in his 80s. And we were fishing one day, and I said, I remember this experience. And he said, oh, that's the day I lost my job, right? We came home. He was driving me home from school. And we pulled in. I can remember where he was sitting. I can remember the color of the Pontiac. I got out of the car and walked to the back door, and my dad didn't get out of the car. He just sat there. He just sat there, looking straight ahead. And that was odd to me. But I never really asked him about it. I just remembered. And so years later, when I'm talking with him about that, and I said, remember when you lost your job back in Indiana? And he said, yeah. I said, I remember this day where you came home and you just sat in the car and you never got out of the car. And he said, all I could think about was, I don't know what I'm going to do. Right? I don't know what I'm going to do. In his mind, he was faced with something that had troubled him and that was in the imperfect form of troubling him. It couldn't go away. Right? I've had moments like that. Maybe you have had too, where you've just said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Right? And at the end of saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, you get up, you have breakfast, you go to lunch, and you're still thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay? I want you to see that this is this idea that he faces. Whenever you've had that thought that said, it's always in my head, it's always in my head, I'm always facing this struggle, this fear, I'm troubled. That's what's happening here. And by the way, it just wasn't happening to Nebuchadnezzar. It's happening to the wise men whom he asked to interpret the dream. They say the thing that the king asked us is difficult, for no one can show it to the king except the gods, and their dwelling is not with the flesh. He said that the wise men say, listen, this can't be done, right? And you're going to kill us for something that can't be done, right? So there's fear there. Fear. And that's the first idea. Our inabilities surface fear. We're afraid of circumstances we can't control. Here's the second one. Our inabilities reveal a prideful spirit. We're sure we could do it if we only had a little help. Okay. Our inabilities surface a prideful spirit. We're sure we could do it if we only had a little help. And we sometimes have thought of pride as, listen, I can do this. I don't need any help. Okay. But I want to reveal to you that pride actually is when you say of something that is impossible, I think I can do it, but I'm going to need some help. And you see that in chapter 2, verse 7. They answered a second time, the wise men, and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we'll show him its interpretation. You're asking us something that's too hard to do. Just give us a little help. Give us a clue, right? Can you do something in charades and let us guess at the dream, okay? Like, I just want you to see, they're trying to ask for some kind of help. And I just want to remind you, that too is a prideful spirit. Because our inabilities to do something that is impossible reveals a prideful spirit when we say, I think I can do it on my own, but I need some help. Right? When things are impossible tasks expose our inabilities, but our inabilities reveal a prideful spirit. We're sure we could do it if we only had a little help. Here's the final idea. Our inabilities bring about frustration. We're prone to blame others for what we can't do. Okay? Our inabilities bring about frustration. We're prone to blame others for what we can't do. Just listen to Nebuchadnezzar. He's asked something that's impossible. The wise men can't do it. And he's frustrated because he himself can't bring the interpretation, and now he's got a double frustration. And look how he answers that in verse 12. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. He said, listen, if none of you can answer, then all of you are going to die. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them, even though they're only 14 or 15-year-old boys. They're young boys. They've been trained. Well, they're probably 18 by now. They're young men. They've been trained, but guess what? They were put in a group of people who were supposed to advise the king, and so now they're going to be killed too. So I just want you to see this. Here's Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego facing what's going to be their execution coming up quickly. Impossible tasks expose our inabilities. Here's the second idea. Impossible tasks are meant to drive us to God. Now, we tend to go to God, but we tend to go in a panic, right? Like, God, it's impossible. I'm really praying now. I really mean it this time, okay? So that's how we tend to go with things that are impossible. What is really remarkable about Daniel's response is there isn't an ounce of panic in it. Okay, now, if you and I knew that we were to be executed tomorrow morning, that could bring about some panic, right? But Daniel doesn't seem to have that. So here's a few ideas that go with impossible tasks are meant to drive us to God. Don't panic, take steps of faith, invite the prayer support of others. Right out of the text. Don't panic, take steps of faith, invite the prayer support of others. Now I know, physically, emotionally, everything is panicking, okay? But I just want to remind you that you're not supposed to panic. And you'll see that in the language that the Bible shares about Daniel's story. Here's the first idea. Don't panic. Gather data so that you might pray. This kind of just jumped out of the text at me. Like when I face something that's a difficult situation, my mind starts gathering data, okay? But it's usually gathering data so that I can fix it, right? Like, okay, I need to figure this out, I need to figure this out, I need a context, I start asking questions because I'm trying to figure it out. I very rarely ask questions just to pray, but that's exactly what Daniel does because the task is impossible. He's not trying to figure it out. He knows it's impossible. So therefore, but he's not panicking. In fact, the language is just so different. Look at it in verse 14. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion. Okay, every other Babylonian wise man is running around like a chicken with his head cut off, thinking he's going to die. And Daniel steps forward with prudence and discretion. The word prudence is a word that means counsel. He's asking questions. He's asking questions. Discretion has this idea that he's not rattled, he's using tact and addressing. By the way, the man who's responsible, the captain of the king's guard, that's responsible for all the executions, that's the guy he goes and talks to. In fact, different translations render this phraseology with words like wisdom and tact, the NIV, discretion and discernment, the New American Standard, counsel and wisdom, the New King James. I love the way Peterson renders this in the Message. He said, when Arioch, chief of the royal guards, was making arrangements for the execution, Daniel wisely took him aside and quietly asked him what was going on. Why this all of a sudden? Right? Like, can you imagine? I just want you to, when you're reading this, you're thinking, man, Daniel is like one cool guy, like nothing rattles him. He's going to figure it out because he's so level-headed. Everybody else is panicking, and he's got prudence and discretion, right? But I want you to see, he has that for one purpose, just so that he would know how to pray. Let that settle in. Like, when was the last time when you faced something that was impossible, you asked good questions, carefully articulated questions, but not so that you could fix it, but just so you could pray? And that's exactly what we see. Don't panic, gather data so that you might pray. Now watch this. This is really amazing. Take steps of faith. It's not faith if you can see the outcome. And maybe that's where we as Christians in the western part of the world haven't had to exercise much faith, because we can always see the outcome. We have savings accounts. We have food in the refrigerator. We're not really worried about some of the things that worry the rest of the world. You need to take steps of faith. It's not faith if you can see the outcome. Now, Daniel gathered the information, and he still hasn't done anything. Okay, verse 16. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Stop there. He doesn't know the dream, and he doesn't know the interpretation, and he's already made an appointment. Just let that settle in, okay? That's like you saying, Phil, I got this really big exam I got to take. When are you going to take it? Well, the professor told me I could take it anytime I wanted to, but I'm going to take it tomorrow morning. Really? When have you studied? I haven't. Okay. Do you know what's on it? No, I don't even know what's on it. Okay. I want you to see that that's Daniel's approach to this. This is really remarkable. Like he doesn't know the dream. Just stay with me. How can he give the interpretation? But he goes ahead and walks into the king and says, I need to make an appointment, and tomorrow I'll tell you the dream. Okay. Remarkable. Then Daniel went into the house. Here's your final idea right here. Invite the prayer support of others. Remember, you need God and others. Right? You need God and others. Invite the prayer support of others. Now, none of that feels like he solved the problem, does it? None of that feels like he's overcome the impossibility. He hasn't done, for our practical purposes, anything to overcome this impossibility. He doesn't know the dream, and he doesn't know the interpretation. He's made an appointment that tomorrow morning he's going to see the king and give him the interpretation and the dream, and he has neither. Okay? But he invites the prayer support of others, and I love this. Watch this. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time, okay, by faith. Verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. By the way, those are the Hebrew names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those are his three friends, right? This is so cool. They are listed here in Daniel chapter 3. You'll get their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They changed, the Babylonians changed their names to reflect their Babylonian false gods. But here, their names are still the same to reflect the true God. Hananiah, God protects. Mishael, who is like the mighty one. Azariah, God will help. It's almost like Daniel says, okay, I have my appointment. I don't know the dream, and I don't know the meaning, and I'm going to cry out to God, but I need help. And so he walks into the room, and he says, hey, God protects. Hananiah walks up. Hey, who is like the mighty one? Mishael walks up. Hey, God will help. Azariah walks up. He literally uses their Hebrew names to remind him that God will give him the answer. It's beautiful. And what does he ask him to do? And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. Call out to God. Now, just for a moment, ponder that. When you have a problem and you run to your friend group, do you run just to say, hey, I got one request, just pray? Or do you run to get sympathy, to get empathy, to get agreement, to get complaining, to be like an Israelite of the Old Testament, right? Do you run to get some kind of something back from them? Or do you just go and say, hey, I only got one request, just pray? And they ask you questions about, well, what do you want me to pray about? And rather than just go in and let them solve all the problems with the gossip and stuff, you say, I just need you to pray, right? Because I'm struggling with something that is impossible. The Nelson Study Bible said of this particular passage, Daniel, despite his education, which was Babylonian, right, and expertise, which he had certain abilities, still knew that prayer to the omniscient God was the first step in a crisis situation. However, Daniel did not pray alone. He sought the counsel of friends who would raise petition to the Lord with him. I love that. Daniel sought help. And he prayed. Now, okay, I just got to remind you of the context here. There is an impossibility. The Babylonian king says he's going to execute everybody unless they can tell him what he dreamed in the middle of the night, and he is the only one who knows that information. It's not shared with anybody. It's not on the internet. It's nowhere to be found. It's just in his head. He says, I want the dream and I want the interpretation or everybody dies. Daniel says, everybody's panicking. Daniel says, I have a few questions. Why are we doing this in such an urgent rush? Why is everybody being executed? Oh, because this is the story. He needs his dream and the answer to the dream. And Daniel says, okay, I got it, thanks. I'm going to go talk to my friends. Well, before I go talk to my friends, let me talk to the king, okay? He walks into the king. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. Now I'm going to go talk to my friends. And he goes and talks to his friends. And rather than panic, he just says, will you guys pray with me? Okay. And then, are you ready for this? This is one of my favorite parts of this whole story. It's a night vision, okay? It's a night vision, which means there's a very real possibility that after he talked to the king and after he prayed, he did what? He went to sleep. What? He just went to sleep, okay? We don't know if it's a vision that he was praying and saw the vision, but it's a night vision. So there's a real possibility that he said, okay, I've done everything I can do. It's an impossible task. I'll go to sleep. And in the morning when he woke up, guess what? God had provided an answer. And that brings us to your final idea. Impossible tasks are accomplished only by God. They're only accomplished by God. Now look in your text at Daniel chapter 2, verse 17. Oh, he's finished the prayer, okay? In verse 18, and he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. And Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Hold on, not once did Daniel say, hey, I figured it out. Everything from the answer forward is about the fact that God did it. And that's what impossible tasks are meant to do. I would just tell you, if there is a hint of you when something that was really difficult or hard was accomplished, and you start to talk about what you did, it wasn't an impossible task because you think you did it. Impossible tasks are only accomplished by God. So note it, here it is. Just several things about God in this text. He is all wise. He is all wise. Look at the text in chapter 2, verse 20. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of the Lord God forever, to whom belong wisdom. Lord, you have all the wisdom. But look at verse 21. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. These things can't be known. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. This great reminder that he is all wise. God is all wise. He is wiser than all of the Babylonian wise men that couldn't figure it out. You with me in that? Daniel had to ask God to get the answer. The Babylonian wise men, nobody could get it. He now knows the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he knows the interpretation. He is all wise, but he's not only all wise, note this, he is all powerful. And the text shows us that in verse 20. Right there. When Daniel wakes up and he's got the vision, he just says, it's all God. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. God alone has the power to do things that are impossible. There is no reflection that Daniel has done anything here other than be the receiver, other than be the instrument. He is all powerful. Here's my favorite one. He is in control. Impossible tasks are only accomplished by God because he is in control. Remember how fear out of lack of control is generating, we realize our inabilities, is generating all of that fear because we're not in control. God is in control. Look at this, verse 21. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. Now, stop there for a second. Let me just talk about that. I love fall. It's my favorite season of the year. Absolutely my favorite season. When we lived in California, when I was in seminary for 4 years, it was 80 degrees and sunny every day. I hated it, okay? Every day, you just woke up, it was 80 degrees and sunny. It was always the same thing, like 80 degrees, it's a beautiful day and the sun's out, okay? Big deal. I wanted a thunderstorm, okay? When we came back to the East Coast, one of the first things I did, I remember when I changed my driver's license over from California, when we were living in upstate New York to New York, we walked out of the DMV, it was fall, and Kim said, "What are you doing?" I said, "There is a pile of leaves." I walked right over to them. I'm an adult, grown man. I walk over to them, I get down in them, I pick them up, and I just smell them, right? I just said, finally, the fall is here, okay? For 4 years, I've waited just to smell fall again. I love the fall. If I could have it my way, it would be fall every day of the year, okay? That's right. Winter's off the table, summer, you can do what you want down at Ocean City. I just want the fall, okay? Guess what? No matter how much time I wish for the fall, I don't control when it comes. Right? You take your favorite season of the year. It might be the summer for you. It may be the winter for you. It may be the spring for you. Whatever your favorite season is, you have no control over when it shows up. Just let that thought settle in, and then notice the phrase that comes after it. He removes kings and sets up kings. Listen, I vote because I'm an American citizen. That's what I should do. It's my responsibility. But I do not believe that I ultimately am making the decision. Yet when we come to election time, it's all about this, isn't it? You got to vote because you got to make the decision. You're not making the decision, right? You should vote. You're a citizen. It's your responsibility. But I don't want you to think that you're making the decision because look at this. God is the one who removes kings and sets up kings. He's the one who does that. He is all wise. He is all powerful. He is in control. Let me give you two more. Here they are. He is a giver. This is where Daniel reveals that he was just the receiver. There's not an ounce of pride in him here. In fact, it's so staggering. Here's this young man who is incredibly gifted, who's been selected out of all of the other teenagers and who is going to be appointed, and yet this guy walks throughout the book of Daniel as one of the most humble guys you'd ever see. He just doesn't seem to take credit while all the kings around him are taking credit, and while they throw purple robes on him and gold chains on him and everything to make him look important, and they appoint him to higher classes, it's like he just says, "I'm just Daniel," right? Because he understands that God is the giver. Look at this in the text again, verse 21. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness. God is the one who does all of those things. Wow, that's so helpful. Like, if you have an idea that came from the Lord, that idea, how do I say it any other way? It's not really your idea. Right? God is the one. You say, well, yeah, but you know, I only had that idea because I went to this school and was trained in this way and I grew up in this family, and you decided all of that. Right? I love the fact that at some stage we do begin to take responsibility for things, but it's not like we were the ones who decided where we would be born. How many of you know what town you were born in? Can I see your hands? Okay. How many of you thought you had any part in that decision at all? You didn't. Why? Because God is the one who is the giver of life. God is the one who is doing these things. God is the one who gives wisdom, reveals deep and hidden things. He's the one who knows the darkness. By the way, just for a moment, When an atheist, agnostic sometimes, but not all the time because they're kind of making up their mind, okay? But when someone definitively says, it's because of knowledge that I know there is no God, you almost have to say, where did you get the knowledge? Because God is the giver of wisdom. He's the one who reveals the deep and hidden things. You don't figure that out on your own. Here's the final one, and just the final thought. He alone makes impossibilities realities. God alone makes the impossibilities realities. Now, next week, we're going to look at that dream, okay? He hasn't even told you what it is. This is just like the foreword to the whole thing. It's like the prelude. It's so cool that all this stuff is going on because he's going to tell you the dream, and he's going to tell you what was in the dream, and he's going to give you the interpretation of the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to say, thank you very much. I'm not going to listen to a thing you say. Okay, so that's kind of how it works, right? But here's what I want you to see. He alone makes impossibilities realities. Look at how Daniel ends this prayer. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise you, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you. Okay, this is a 24-hour window. You with me? For you have made known to us the king's matter. The king asked for a dream, us to tell him his dream and the interpretation. And when I was sleeping last night in a night vision, you gave me the dream and you gave me the interpretation. And it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the fact that you gave it. You say, well, then what do we do when we are the one who is giving or engaged in what God has given us? Okay. There's only one thing we do. See it at the beginning of the verse? For you have made known to us the king's matter, therefore I give thanks and praise. That's it. That's it. That's the spirit of the person who knows that God alone makes impossibilities realities. Our pride is such that we start to touch things that God did in such a way that we want a little bit of credit for them. It's this great reminder that you don't want to touch the glory of God. It's not yours. Things that he has used you in, things where you're in the process and life seems impossible and you're trying your best to walk by faith, even as you're walking by faith, that's God doing it, right? You do not want to touch the glory of God. Because I'm telling you right now, the only thing you should be doing is saying, I'm giving God thanks and praise for what he's done. For it is God who made known to us the king's matter. Here's a couple of takeaways for you. Well, there's really only one. God alone makes impossibilities realities. Don't take the credit. You didn't do it. Okay? That's right. When God works you through an impossible situation, don't touch the credit. You didn't do it. The best thing you can do is humble yourself before God and say, Lord, I need help. And I'm asking friends to help. I'm asking others to pray for me. But if you remove this impossibility, if you make the impossibility into something that is real for me, then guess what? You take away the impossibility, it becomes a reality. I'm not going to take the credit for it because I didn't do it. Perhaps that's the most important takeaway you can get from any discussion of an impossibility. Just let me push pause and say one more thing. That is not the way our world talks to us. Okay? Our world says, oh, it seems impossible, but you can do it. Okay? Just hear that. You can do it. No mention of God anywhere. Right? The answer is, it is an impossibility, but God can do it. And he's probably going to use you to do it because it's on your heart to do it. But so pray, take steps of faith, and go ahead, but don't touch it. Don't take the credit, because in the end, you didn't do it, because only God can make impossibilities realities. Father, it's been a privilege to look to your word this morning. We're thankful, we're grateful, we're humbled, we're convicted. We realize we keep trying to take credit for things we didn't really do. We want to be faithful. We can do that, but we don't want to think that we've accomplished great things. It's you that has accomplished the great things. It's you that solves situations that are impossible. I pray this morning for those who are here who may be struggling with things that feel impossible, that you'll use some of your word this morning that we've talked about to help them in that. That they'll be quick to recognize their need, that they'll be quick to call out for help, that they'll be quick to circle up some friends just to pray for them. That they'll take small steps of faith and that they won't panic because they're trusting in the God who does the impossible. We're humbled, we're grateful, and we are thankful. We praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.